everyone, and welcome back to another podcast, Making a Difference in Mental Health. I'm your host, Danielle Young, with my co-host here with me, Miss Wendy Grier. We're continuing our conversation about different services and resources in the community in regards to mental health. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Mrs. Paula Nemoga, who is the ABH Area Director for Greater Maryland Adult and Youth PRP Services. So she works with us at ABH, which is great. Paula, welcome, and we thank you for being here today. But before we begin with Paula, I gotta say hi to my co-host. Hey, Wendy, how you doing?
Hey, Danielle, how are you? So excited to have Paula here to share her knowledge and expertise with our audience, and we're going to dive right into it. So, Paula, can you just tell our audience a little bit about your background?
All right. Well, I've been working in mental health for about 11 years now. I started working in a psychiatric rehabilitation program as a case manager. And then from there, I started doing therapy, and I went, believe it or not, back to psychiatric rehabilitation program as a director. And then when ABH opened up in Frederick, I came on as a therapist here and have been doing that for several years now. I've been with this agency for about 6 years, and lo and behold, I am back home in my psychiatric rehabilitation program.
Very nice. Can you, before we get into your other unique areas that you work with, can you just describe to the audience a little bit about what is psychiatric rehab program?
Of course. So we work with adults and children that have severe mental illnesses, or for the kids, it's more behavioral problems. We teach them life skills, how to handle bullying, homework help. With adults, it can be more like finding resources in the community, money management, medication management, job resources, things like that.
Wonderful. So I understand, too, that you work with individuals living with Alzheimer's. And what can you share in terms of what that experience is like as it pertains to mental health treatment?
Well, a lot of people that are battling Alzheimer's also struggle with depression and anxiety. And in that front, it's because they're lonely. You know, they start to slowly forget the people that are around them, or they're in a facility and they don't have their hobbies anymore. They're starting to forget their past. And so it's just trying to help them. Obviously, you can't really help them remember, because those memories do start to fade away, but help them be comfortable where they are. And there's a lot of resources out there to help people in the here and now when they're battling with Alzheimer's. And it's not just the people that are individuals with Alzheimer's, but also the caregivers that are in those positions as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I don't think people really realize that can be a very isolating disease when you start to forget your connections and your past and things that matter. What kinds of techniques work well with this population and their support systems?
Well, I've done a lot of support groups, and those are definitely helpful because they're around like-minded individuals, people experiencing some of the same things. For individuals with Alzheimer's, some things that do help are having picture books, like the coffee table books, things for them to look through, or old pictures that they had from their home or their families, showing them that sense of what they had, kind of bringing back flashes of those memories, or memory games, helping prolong what they have. And sometimes just listening and talking, hearing their stories. As they start to digress, they kind of start moving backwards a little bit. So I'm trying to think the best way to explain this. So they kind of go backwards in the aging process almost. They might think that they are in a job that they had when they were in their 20s. And so listening to those stories that they had then, and it's going to be helpful for them.
Okay. Thank you for that.
You know, Paula, I'm sitting and I'm listening to you, and it's interesting because this is a population, the elderly population, we don't really talk about much. I know a lot of times when we are focusing on mental health and we're focusing on resources and services, especially over the past couple of casts, we've been really looking at young children, middle schoolers, teenagers, and maybe young adults. But there is that elderly population too. And then there's the extra layer of Alzheimer's. And, I like how you say when you're working with this particular population, you're really wanting to aid them in being comfortable in the now and aiding them with the picture books and with different memories that they may be able to obtain or hold on to with tangible things. And I also like that you are really giving a voice to also the caregivers that are also impacted by Alzheimer's and their loved ones. But then there is this other unique layer to the work that you do. You work with the elderly population that's also in the LGBTQ community, which I remember kind of talking to you before, and I said, wow, that is a combination. Can you talk about how you got started with this particular group? Because this is definitely something that I've not heard of before, but something that's certainly worth, talking about and discovering for our audience. Can you kind of elaborate on that? How did you get started with this group?
Absolutely. So I started with Alzheimer's Association back in 2009. I worked with individuals with Alzheimer's. I worked with caregivers, and then I also co-facilitated a group where we had the Alzheimer's individuals together with the caregivers, and then halfway through we split and they would go their separate ways. And in that time, I also worked with the LGBT community. I had one client in particular, and it was a heartbreaking story when I first started working with him, because he didn't remember that his children disowned him and no longer spoke to him. And it was because he came out as gay. And every time he would talk about his children, he would say, it's been a while since I've talked to them. I need to call them. And his caregiver would remind him, they don't talk to you anymore. And he would start crying. And his caregiver felt that he needed to remind him of this every single time, because he was scared that he would actually pick up the phone and call them. And it was really hard for me to watch. And so that's when I first realized, wow, there is this other community out there. To add on to that, I am part of the LGBTQ community. And when the Alzheimer's Association found out about this a couple years ago, they asked if I would start helping them advocate within the community as far as helping them at Pride in Frederick and other areas. And about, a few months, maybe about 6 months ago, I got an email asking if I would be willing to help them facilitate an LGBT group that they run. The current facilitator had become too busy and couldn't do it anymore and was stepping down. And so we do that group every third Thursday of the month. And so I've kind of inherited that.
Wow. I mean, just listening to you again, that story, I don't know how many people have ever verbalized connecting to it, but maybe there's someone in our audience who has connected to it, or who's connected to either the Alzheimer's side of it, where there is the loss of the certain memories, or even the disposition of family members, friends, or those who are either outside of the LGBTQ community who are not advocates or who just have lack of education. But I can almost imagine what that feels like to just watch. I don't know what it's like to feel or to be in that position, but to just watch. And so I think that you're doing a good work for the community. But because we're also in mental health, what are some of the mental health challenges that this particular group or population is facing?
Well, like I brought up earlier, definitely depression and anxiety. They're being isolated. They're slowly forgetting their long-term memories. They're forgetting the people around them, their own family. In the case of my client, he was forgetting that his own kids weren't speaking to him anymore. So the depression definitely sits in. They're anxious because they can't remember anything, especially when things first start setting in. So those are definitely the big ones. But there's plenty more that come with it, I'm sure.
It sounds like it's a huge lack of control that they feel, because they don't know from day to day, what am I going to remember? What's going to seem familiar? And, your story was so moving, Paula. I just have to jump in and say that I cannot imagine anybody being in that situation. And I know there are plenty of people that are. So it is super heartbreaking, but at the same time, this is such important conversation to bring light to people that, who suffer with Alzheimer's and happen to be gay or in the LGBT community, and then abandoned on top of that. So that's, it's like a double whammy almost. It's incredible to hear. And so I'm grateful that we're having this conversation to bring it to light so our audience knows about it. And I'm sure, as Danielle touched upon it, maybe we're speaking to somebody who's listening right now to our podcast. So in that discussion, what are specifically, let's just look at Alzheimer's, because I actually have a family member that, Alzheimer's, I believe, is on a spectrum. And I had a family member that passed away in January of this year. Oh. And I have a family member who is on the spectrum, not full blown, but does have dementia, where, our conversations are about things that she doesn't remember. And we hope that she will remember, but then we have to come back around and, talk about it again. So, you're familiar with that. So what other resources that you could share with our audience that are in the community, not only to support the family members, but also to just support the person who is living with Alzheimer's?
Well, my first go-to was always the Alzheimer's Association. They have a great mission, which is part of their mission is to provide support, education, training, and other resources to increase knowledge and support those facing Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. So that's just part of their mission. They also work to help fund research, to find that cure that we're looking for. But also, if you were to get on their webpage at alz.org, they have what they call their CRF, their Community Resource Finder. And there's so many things on this page, from programs and events, AARP family caregiving, care at home, community services, housing options, medical services. And, that's all right there on their page, available for people to see. And then just to piggyback on that, there's resources for the LGBTQ community members right on that website as well. So everything's, visible and easy to find. We also have our community walk that they have. So they do a walk every October in the Frederick area that I participate in. But there's walks all over Maryland. The one I participate in is going to be held October 10th at Nimio Field at Harry Grove Stadium in Frederick. This year's goal is to raise $265,000, and every single one of those dollars goes back to those affected by Alzheimer's disease in the community.
That is amazing. Yeah, that is amazing. I like that you gave the resources for the Alzheimer's Association, alz.org. I like that you just told us about a community walk. This is a way that people can come out and participate on, you said October 10th. I love that there is a goal to raise money for awareness, for funding for this particular organization and the community. I think all of that is awesome. And Paula, before we wrap up, I'm going to throw a little something in here. Our conversation specifically about the elderly community, and I don't know if this is even appropriate, but it reminds me of The Notebook. You've seen the movie The Notebook?
Yes.
What are your thoughts? I know we're veering off a little bit, but what are your thoughts about the depiction? Because I had maybe a great grandfather who succumbed to the disease, but I don't have anyone else in my family who has, to my knowledge, have Alzheimer's. However, is that a accurate depiction of Alzheimer's, or is it, it's kind of romanticized, but it makes me think about that particular love story. And it was very touching because you did say about the memories and the books, and she wrote a journal, and, we didn't know, but it was told from her story through the books. But, the husband, the father, the dad, I think his name was Noah. Noah ended up telling the story to his children. What are your thoughts about even Hollywood and that depiction of that movie?
Well, I would definitely, like you said, kind of say it definitely was romanticized. It was a beautiful story, and it can be true to an extent, but like the pieces where she would come back and be like, oh, I remember that. That was me. That was us.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that doesn't happen.
Okay.
Once those memories are gone, they are gone. But they can hold on to certain things for so long. And, seeing those pictures with their family can help bring some sort of comfort. But unfortunately, it doesn't bring the memories back that are already lost.
Okay. Do you find that, this is just a question, because that movie was a beautiful movie, and of course it's Hollywood, so yes, it's probably embellished on many levels because it's entertainment, but it was just a very lovely story that was told between this couple. So you said when a memory is gone, a memory is gone. Do you find that your clients you work with, do they understand that and understand that this person is the relative even though they can't remember it? I don't know if I said that right.
Not always. I mean, technically Alzheimer's disease is it's general memory loss and other cognitive abilities that are serious enough to interfere with daily life. So that's kind of like the actual definition. So basically, you're losing the memories, you're losing cognitive abilities. It's progressive. So it doesn't rewind. And so they may see these pictures. It may bring them comfort that the people they're with, in the way that the people they're with around them now are the same people in the pictures. So they know that they knew them, but they're not going to remember them by looking at the pictures, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. You clarify that. And I'm glad you also brought up that piece about you're losing cognitive abilities. I've had, a lot of people will ask me as a mental health professional about Alzheimer's and, why do people die from it? And that's why, because you start to lose your cognitive abilities, the involuntary things that you do in terms of like going to the bathroom, eating, breathing, all those things. So I'm glad you brought that up just to let our audience know that it's, those two things working in conjunction that creates such a difficult disease to live with.
And it even also affects the part of our brain that involves language. So eventually we forget that too. The ability to care for ourselves, that's why it's so fatal.
And it also reminds me, again, this is another Hollywood reference, maybe a little bit different, but how Benjamin Button, he kind of was born old and kind of passed young, but then there were certain cognitive abilities and motor skills and things that were lost along the way. I think this is a really interesting conversation. I could go down that rabbit hole, but I appreciate really you bringing just information, education, resources, access through the community to those that are in our audience and for this community. I appreciate you being a champion for the community. Before we wrap up though, and you've given us many resources, what kind of support or advice or tips would you even give for those within the community or those who support the caregivers? What type of advice, tip, or encouragement would you give those before we go?
Definitely seek out the help. Look into the Alzheimer's Association. They have a 24/7 helpline to help you find the resources that you need. Never feel like you have to do this on your own, whether you're a caregiver or you just found out you were diagnosed. You're not alone. This is something that I think everyone just needs to have the support for. It could, for those with Alzheimer's, it's very isolating. For the caregivers, it can be very frustrating. And we can help you as far as find those financial resources. And just to throw out another statistic out there, I know I've thrown out a lot, but it's a very costly disease. And Alzheimer's and other dementia cost the nation $355 billion.
Ooh, wow.
In 2021. And by 2050, they're projecting that it's going to rise to $1.1 trillion. And the caregiving cost alone is over 11 million Americans provide an unpaid 15.3 billion hours of care. And that's valued at nearly $257 billion. So seek the help. You never have to do this alone. Get the financial care that you deserve.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. Paula, I think that you've given us so much today, so much information that we all could really use, whether it's someone that we know or just to have a knowledge base, even as clinicians, just to have the knowledge base of that. We may happen to have a client who is a caregiver, or we may happen to have a client who has been directly affected by Alzheimer's, by the elderly within the LGBT community who also have Alzheimer's disease. So thank you so much for this. Wendy, what are your last thoughts before we wrap up? And then tell our audience what we have coming up.
Sure, absolutely. Paula, again, I echo what Danielle has said. Thank you so much for joining us today on our podcast. We really appreciate all the information you've given us and our audience about Alzheimer's and the LGBTQ community. I'm telling you, I never even thought about that until today, until you started talking about elderly and LGBTQ. And to me, it makes perfectly good sense. So I hope that, our audience can take away that resource of the ALC.org, Alzheimer's Association. And on that, also their LGBTQ resources. So I want to emphasize that so people can go to one website and find all their services and resources. So again, thank you so much for coming on our show today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. And we are fortunate at ABH that you work with us, and so we can always lean on you when we have questions with clients that I'm sure we're going to come across in our practice. So thanks again, Paula. We really appreciate you. So Danielle, coming up as we wrap up our first part 1 series on resources in the community, we're going to have an interesting conversation. We have a guest coming on to talk about sex trafficking. That's a topic that doesn't get enough attention and can never get enough attention. So we're very fortunate that one of our community partners is coming on our show to talk about that tragedy. So we look forward to those conversations.
All right. Well, audience, we hope that you tune in. We want to say thank you again to Miss Paula for being with us today. My name is Danielle Young with my co-host Wendy Grier. This is ABH Podcast, Making a Difference in Mental Health, where we're striving to make a difference in mental health. We will see you next time.